either, because they should believe the truth about a God who was great. I thought Islam provided that. I used to go to this playground in my neighborhood. I played a lot of basketball. Surprise, right? Played a lot of basketball. I ended up playing a little bit of college basketball, Division I ball, but I would spend a lot of time just shooting jump shots, 500 a day, and just playing at this playground. Everyone would go home. I'd stick around, shoot more jump shots, and then I'd go to this play structure, this big wooden thing that no one was playing on, and I would just sit there and I'd pray, talk out loud to God as a Muslim, and ask God to give me guidance in ways I can sort of show these foolish Christians that the God that they think is great isn't great, but the God who is great is the God of the Bible. The God of the Quran. And that Christians who believe in a God who is triune don't believe in a God who is great. How could they? If they believed in a God who was great, then the Father who is God wouldn't need help from the Son or the Holy Spirit, because a God who is great doesn't need help. See, I thought that you guys were just confused tritheists. You thought you were monotheists, but you're really just confused tritheists. And that's not a great God at all. And then a God who would become incarnate and walk among us, who would limit himself to this shell of a body that gets tired, that can't be a great God. And my goodness, he dies at the hands of the very sinners he creates. How can that possibly be a God who is great? He dies, he cries from the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He's not only weak and can't save himself, but he's also confused, because who's God in this picture exactly? So I would go on and just talk about these things and ask God for ways to get me to get these Christians to see that the God they worship isn't great. I used to hear Christians singing this hymn, how great thou art. And I would make a joke, you ought to change it to how great thou aren't, because the God you worship isn't great. That's my mindset, my context. But there was something else. As important as answering the theological questions are, as important as answering the historical questions are, as important as answering the biblical questions are, there's a personal question. There's a personal aspect that has to be dealt with. And if it's not dealt with, you will get nowhere. Nowhere. I could see it within myself. There is a profound personal price, and we talked about this during the Q&A, a profound personal price that a Muslim pays in giving his life to Christ, having come from that Muslim background. A profound price. And somewhere along the line, during the course of the 9 years it took me from the first time I solidly considered the gospel to when I embraced it, during that 9 years, it wasn't always conscious to me, but maybe subconscious, that it wasn't the evidence that kept me from the cross. It was the consequences of the evidence that kept me from the cross. And until you actually recognize that, you're going to have these conversations with your Muslim friends that are a lot like running hard as you can headfirst into a wall. The wall won't move, and all you're going to do is get a headache. And sometimes our conversations with our Muslim friends can seem like that, not because the evidence isn't there, because the consequences of the evidence certainly is. And that was true for me as well. See, we have this duplicity when it comes to truth. And this isn't just Muslims either. I've seen many people of many different walks of life, atheists, Hindus, Buddhists, people who are sort of what I call apatheists. They're apathetic about God's existence. Same thing. They have this duplicitous attitude towards truth. They say, I want to go where the truth is, and the truth matters, and all these things, and then when the truth suddenly is presented to them, they run from it because of the consequences of it. We're often duplicitous when it comes to this. And here's an important thing I want you to understand as you share the gospel with your Muslim friends. That consequence is profound and it's powerful. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He says, if you look for truth, you may find comfort in the end. If you look for comfort, you will find neither comfort nor truth, only soft soap in the beginning and in the end, despair. For 9 years, I looked for comfort and didn't find truth. Then I wanted the truth, and then I found that comfort I was looking for. Oftentimes, people act that way. See, there's this bit of a spiritual eclipse that happens, friends, when someone is confronted with something that's contrary to their own worldview, and the gospel is very different than the Islamic worldview. No matter how many people will try to tell you that they're just superficially different but fundamentally the same, it's exactly the opposite, and I'll get to that later. When you see the differences in these worldviews, and they're so different, the cost, the consequences of becoming a Christian are so incredibly powerful that they can mar and shape and distort reality for us in very profound ways. Very profound ways. Because you'll think that the consequences of the truth is the truth itself. Ironically, that's not true. Think about Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate standing in front of Jesus. The trial is really Pontius Pilate on trial, not Jesus Christ on trial. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, the very embodiment of truth. Pontius Pilate has every opportunity to talk to Jesus and ask him any question he can ask, the one who is the embodiment of truth, and he asks him the right question. What is truth? But he asked with the wrong attitude. He was a cynic. Wasn't a skeptic. A skeptic is somebody who won't believe something until there's good enough evidence. A cynic is somebody who won't believe even when there is. And Pilate was a cynic. What is truth, he asked, and then he walked out. He didn't want to hear the answer. If you watch the movie The Passion of the Christ, there was a scene there. How many of you have seen the movie The Passion of the Christ? Most of you have. There's a scene that's actually reminiscent of what the Bible describes. Pilate's wife, Claudia, has a dream about Jesus, and she's greatly disturbed by this dream. And she says, in the Bible, she says to Pilate, don't have anything to do with Jesus. I've been greatly disturbed because of him in a dream. In the movie The Passion of the Christ, she comes to Pilate, and Pilate's disturbed now. He sent Jesus away to be judged by Herod, and he asks his wife Claudia the same question he just asked Jesus, but with a different attitude. He says, Claudia, what is truth? Do you know it when you hear it? And she says, of course I do, don't you? He says, no, can you tell me how? And she said, if you won't hear the truth, no one can tell you. A matter of the will. And then he gets mad at her. He stands up and he says, truth? You want to hear my truth, Claudia? My truth is this. I've been putting down rebellions in this rotten outpost for 11 years. Now, if I condemn this man, his followers might start a rebellion. If I don't condemn this man, Caiaphas will start a rebellion. Either way, there will be bloodshed. And Caesar has warned me twice, Claudia, that the next time it'll be me on that cross. That is my truth. He didn't discuss truth one time. The consequences of truth, yes, he discussed those in spades. You see how powerful it is? He actually mixed it up. The consequences of truth became the only truth he could actually talk about. What were the consequences? And that blinded him. It was an eclipse, so he couldn't see Jesus. You see, the moon is this cold, dead rock. Think about the moon for a moment. This cold, dead rock, it's 1/6 the size of the earth. It's millions of times smaller than the sun. Yet, as recent events just showed us, when that small dead rock moves between us and the sun, it blocks out the glorious beauty of the sun. It blocks it out. How does this small dead rock do that? It does that because it's so close to us. The consequences and cost of truth are like that small dead rock. They are a small dead rock, but they're so close to us that they block out the glorious sun that God has provided for us. It is important for us as Christians to move that dead rock out of the way, or to at least get them to see past the dead rock so they can see the glorious sun that God has provided, because there are those costs to pay. I'm going to go through those really quickly and then get to some of the ways we can get past that, and then share specific things about the gospel and open it up for some questions. The first cost is identity. I went into that in Q&A. I won't go into that in any more detail than that. But during the Q&A, I mentioned my own identity. Now, if you look, and I think a lot of you can identify with this, given the backgrounds of some of the folks here. If you look at the East and the West, you see a very different paradigm. If you were to look at Sam Solomon actually describes it this way. If you were to draw a circle with a dot in the middle, in the West, the dot is religious identity. And the circle is you, your whole life. In other words, you're bigger than your religion and your cultural identity. In the East, it's exactly the opposite. In the Middle East and in the East, you are a dot. The culture, the identity, the religious aspects, that surrounds you and permeates you. So that if you were to change your worldview, your religious system, you are turning your back on all of that. It's not an individual choice. It's a communal choice. So think about how hard that would actually be. And I think many of you can recognize the reality behind that. That's what's happening. So there's that identity issue. Then there's the honor and shame culture. In the Middle East and in most Muslim countries, whether they're from the Far East or from the Middle East or from Africa, they're dominated not by a culture of truth and falsehood, like we in the West sort of like have this idea of truth and falsehood, and truth is more important than falsehood. They don't view it that way. Those are important issues. Truth and falsehood are important issues, but the real issues are honor and shame. Do that which is conducive to the honor of the family and the community, and avoid shame. Even lie if you have to preserve honor. So truth is subservient to honor, and sometimes you can use falsehood to avoid shame. So you can see how difficult it can be then in that kind of a paradigm to get someone to become a Christian, because if they become a Christian, that is the greatest shame they could possibly bring on their family. So how tough would it be to look at that and actually want to become a Christian in light of that? I had plenty of encounters with folks where that was the issue. It certainly was for me. I walked into a hospital one day. I was asked by a friend who was a chaplain at a hospital to come and talk to an older Muslim man who was sick in the hospital. She was talking to him about spiritual matters, but he was sort of hesitant to keep talking with her. One, because she was a woman, he was a man. He was uncomfortable with her being in his room, even though it was a hospital room and it wasn't exactly the most romantic of situations. He still didn't like the fact that she was a woman and he was a man in the same room. Plus, there was a bit of a language barrier. So she said, would you come and talk to him? I said, sure. I think he was from Egypt. I'm not totally sure where he was from, but I said, sure, I'd come talk to him. So the hospital doors open, and it's one of those situations where you can smell the sick in the room. Very, very ill, gravely ill, sitting there with tubes coming out of him. I walk into his hospital room with my wife, and he gets up out of his bed to go and shake my hand and offer me some of the sweets that people had brought to him. That's typical Middle Eastern. Like, Ammo, sit down. Ammo means uncle. And whenever, in my culture, whenever someone is older than you and worthy of respect, you call them uncle. Ammo, sit down. Sit down, Ammo. So he sits down and we had this conversation. Now, he asked me questions about Christianity. We went round and round forever. I gave him all the reasons and the evidences for these things. And he was a very bright guy asking me questions, but it wasn't getting anywhere with him. Why wasn't it getting anywhere with him? So I asked him a personal question. I said, where are your children? He said, well, my wife has passed away or something like that, and my children are in the old country. They're flying here for this procedure I'm having. And then I thought to ask him an open-ended question. This is the first way you can get people to actually see the cost of truth. Ask an open-ended question. I said, it's got to be tough to be in this country, a widower, and your kids are coming, and I know that you're facing some difficulties physically. What would happen if you became a Christian? His words, I would die in this country alone. It's a pretty strong reason to not consider the gospel, isn't it? And I told him, I can understand what it's like to risk losing everything, Ammo, but can I tell you, it's worth it. And that's when the tears came, and he asked me to keep that Arabic Bible I brought with me. I had acknowledged and shown him the consequences of truth. If we do that, we often have huge inroads with our Muslim friends. Huge inroads. So ask an open-ended question about the consequences of truth. Ask them. Let's assume for a moment I could show you the gospel was true. And let's say for a moment you agreed with me and you believed it and you embraced it. What would happen next? What consequences would come from that? And then, by all means, stop talking. Let them answer the question and fill in the blanks about some of the negative consequences. And when they tell you that, then ask the follow-up question, aren't those powerful reasons to not be willing to consider what I have to say? And if they might say the same thing to you, sure, you might have similar costs to pay if you stop being a Christian, but the truth is the truth and you'll follow the truth. So ask questions, listen to the answers, and then commit to sticking by them when they have to pay the price. Because they're going to pay the price. And the question is this, where will you be? Matthew 28:19 is not the great suggestion, it's the great commission. Not the great get around to it when you feel like it, not the great hand them a tract and walk away. It's the great commission. It's called the commission because you're being committed to something specific, making disciples, and making disciples takes time. And if you stick with them and say, if you lose family, if you lose community, if you lose culture, if you lose your job, we'll be there for you. Because they're going to ask, where are you going to be? And you can oftentimes make it a little more palatable to feel that cost if you actually tell them, we can be there for you. So ask, listen, and commit. And that's how you can get to talking to your Muslim friends. Now, what would you talk to them about? What would you share with them? Ways that, again, make it attractive, make the gospel attractive, and make good people wish it were true. What are those ways? A couple of things. And we'd talk about the theology of Islam. There are a couple of topics that will come up every time you talk to a Muslim. A few topics. The Bible's been changed. The Trinity makes no sense. How could Jesus be God? And how does the cross possibly actually work? How does someone else paying the price mean your salvation? How does that work exactly? That will always come up. I brought them up every single time, kind of in that order. Because the Trinity's pretty tough. And, if you can't trust the Bible, then why trust what it says and these kind of things? And that goes again back to God's greatness. We can actually show that these very ideas they reject are the very things they should embrace because God is truly great. So let me go into that. God's greatness in preserving his word, talking to Muslims. If you talk to a Muslim and you share a Bible verse, they might be polite and nod, but if they actually get into the conversation with you, eventually they'll tell you, yes, I believe in the Bible. The Bible is, was revealed by God. You're like, oh, really? And but yes, you might be surprised to know that. Most Muslims actually understand that the Quran, the holy book of the Muslims, actually speaks very positively of the Taurat, or the 5 books of Moses, the Zabur, Z-A-B-U-R, or the Psalms of David, and the Injil, the Gospel of Jesus. It speaks very highly of these things, but Islam teaches they were corrupted over time. And that's why the Quran came. It was revealed to Muhammad in the 7th century through the Archangel Gabriel to correct all the corruptions that crept into the text, like the Trinity, like the Incarnation, like the Atonement, and get rid of all that and bring us back to true monotheism. Now, that's what I thought. That's what I would actually argue to Christians, that it's been changed over time. And I would quote like Bart Ehrman or something and say, see, even Western scholars believe the Bible's been changed, and all these things. But then, it's an interesting thing, fascinating in fact, that as I began to read the Quran itself, and I was already reading it quite a bit, but something happened. Let me back up a little bit. People were coming to my door. Those 2 guys I mentioned, Dave and Pete, during the Q&A, they came to my door and they were challenging me a little bit. They didn't always have the best answers in the whole world, but they were challenging me. Now, I wanted to find a contradiction in the Bible that I could smack them in the head with, basically, and keep them down. Because Dave and Pete were a little bit like the Terminator. No matter what you did, they kept coming back up again and keep coming at you in this sort of lumbering way. And I'm like, how do I knock these guys down and keep them down? So there was these Gideons, actually, handing out Bibles on the street corner at the University of Michigan. I walked over and grabbed one of the Bibles, a little green Bible. I still have it. And I tried to convert this Gideon. Didn't work. But I went back to my apartment, sat in this loosely qualifying chair, like it's an apartment, it's a college apartment, so the word chair is a loose term at best. Sat in this thing, tried to find a contradiction in the Bible that I could hit Dave and Pete with. And that's when I saw Luke chapter 3, verse 7 and following. John the Baptist was talking to those who were coming in to be baptized, and he says to them, who told you to flee from the wrath to come? Meaning God's judgment, of course. Then he said something interesting. He said, do not even begin to think to yourself you have Abraham as your father, as if that would save them by itself. For I tell you, God can raise up sons of Abraham from the stones. What is he saying? Tradition will not save you. Truth saves you. Now, I had been asking Christians, why are you a Christian? And they wouldn't give me any good answers. And they'd say, tradition. I'd say, that's a bad reason to be a Christian. But John the Baptist himself, no Christian ever asked me that, why are you a Muslim? John the Baptist had to ask me, why are you a Muslim? Through the power of the Scripture. Do you see how he did that? Isn't it interesting that 20 centuries in the making, the power of the Spirit takes this little tiny green Bible, gives it to this skeptical Muslim kid, and gets him to think, maybe you believe it because you have to believe it, not because it's true. The Bible is powerful, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to know this. Muslims, Hindus, skeptics, atheists, whatever it is, share with them the Bible, not just lofty arguments, because the Bible itself has the ability to change hearts. It changed mine. I began to be very objective at that point and start to think about these things a little more. It changed my mind ever so slightly, but it did have a lasting impact on me. Never speak with lofty arguments and a closed Bible. The Word of God is far more eloquent than you or I or anybody else will ever be. So don't forget that. But as I began to have this shifted mindset, that was going to be a little more objective, I read the Quran numerous times before that, but then I saw some things in the Quran that suddenly jumped out at me that I didn't see before. You see, like I said, Muslims believe that the Bible was once God's word but became changed and corrupted over time, and the Quran came to fix that in the 7th century. But then you read something in the Quran. Interestingly, in the 46th and the 47th verses of the Quran, chapter 5. So chapter 5, verses 46 to 47, it says, وَلْيَحْكُمْ أَهْلَ الْإِنْجِيلِ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهِ فِيهِ وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. وَلْيَحْكُمْ is an Arabic phrase. It's an imperative. It's a direction. It says, you judge right now, present tense, O people of the gospel, by what God has revealed in the gospel. And if you don't, you're an evildoer or rebellious. Did you catch it? If the Bible was changed before the Quran came, but the Quran just told Christians to judge by that gospel, lest they be evildoers, why would God say, go judge by a book that's corrupted, to contain horrible, blasphemous lies? The 68th verse, same chapter, chapter 5, verse 68, specifically says that you stand upon nothing, O people of the scriptures, Christians and Jews, you stand on nothing until you observe, present tense, the Torah and the gospel and all that has been revealed to you from your Lord. So here's a question. How in the world could they observe it if it was corrupted? So horribly corrupted that God had to send another book to fix it all. See the problem? If the Bible was right, because the Quran says the Bible is right, there's a problem because the Bible and the Quran contradict on the deity of Christ, on the resurrection, on the crucifixion, on the Trinity. They contradict each other. So when the Quran says the Bible is right and says it's an authority, there's a problem because now it creates a conflict between the two. But if the Bible was wrong, the Quran is still wrong because it said the Bible was right.
Hello friends, this is Ravi Zacharias. We've been in this ministry at RZIM for over 30 years now. But one of the most thrilling things is about to take place in the launch of our Zacharias Institute. The building for that has already been purchased. It's the biggest endeavor we have ever gone into. It'll be, hopefully, Lord willing, open and launched